Hi everyone, my name's Diabetor, and today I've got 4 more viewer-requested builds to show you. I had a lot of fun using these builds, and I hope you will too. Without further ado, let's get into them. And if you find this video helpful, please leave a like, share the video, and consider subscribing. It really helps me out. And if you want to support my channel, consider becoming a member. As usual, I make my builds at level 125 using the Wretch as the starting class. These are just my personal preferences, and you can bring these builds up to any level you want using any class you want. Your final stats will just look a bit different from mine, but the builds will work just fine. Build number 1, the Milady, requested by Chris Fane 3612. The Milady is one of 3 light greatswords which were added to the game in the DLC. This is the only infusible one, and it's versatile and strong as hell. For the purpose of this guide, I decided to go with a dex build because it gets great dex scaling and can do a lot of different things with the Keen affinity. For stats, we've got the usual 60 Vigor. I put no points into Mind, and I brought Endurance up to 15 just to have the minimum equip load required to medium roll with our equipped gear. Then for damage stats, we've got the minimum 12 Strength required to wield the Milady, 15 Faith for a few buffs, and then I dumped every remaining point into Dex, bringing it up to 72. Up next are the weapons. We've got the Milady using its unique Wing Stance Ash of War and the Keen affinity. We've also got a Misery Cord using the Golden Vow Ash of War for a buff and the Lightning affinity to maximize our critical damage. And we've also got a Finger Seal for casting buffs. Normally I'd use a Weightless Seal here, but this build is going to use the Electrify Armament spell, and so the Finger Seal would give that the most optimal damage with our stats. For talismans, I decided to build around the Wing Stance Ash of War, which is super strong and fun as hell to use. We've got Rolana's Cameo, which boosts Wing Stance's damage by a ridiculous 45% when you hold the stance for 1 second before attacking. We've also got the Shard of Alexandra to boost it by another 15%, the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia for its multi-hit buff, which complements the Wing Stance multi-hit light attack very nicely, and finally the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman for 20% more physical negation. For armor, I went with Lita's set because it looks great and goes nicely with the Milady. Lita's outfit is the Oathseeker Knight set with her unique chest armor, which gives a buff to running and rolling attacks and is just nice to have. Alternatively, if you take 5 points out of Dex and put them in Endurance, then you can use Rakshasa's set for 8% more damage to all of your attacks instead. But I went with Lita's armor because it gets boring to use Rakshasa's for every single build. After that, we've got the spells and buffs. We have 15 Faith, which gives us access to a couple nice buff spells. Bestial Vitality gives health regen over time. Flame Grant Me Strength increases our physical and fire damage by 20% for 30 seconds. And Electrify Armament will buff the Milady with lightning damage for 90 seconds. Electrify Armament scales with the Faith scaling portion of the incant sailing of the seal you use to cast it. In more basic terms, it means that you want to use a seal which has high Faith scaling to get the best damage out of it. That's why I went with the Finger Seal for this build instead of a Weightless Seal like the Dragon Communion Seal, because the Finger Seal will get the best incant scaling with our stats and has high Faith scaling. In addition to the buff spells, I also included Flame Cleanse Me, which is a handy tool you can use to cure yourself of poison or rot in case you run into them. Finally, in our Wondrous Physic, we've got the Opaline Hardtear to increase all of our negations by 15%, and the Thorny Cracktear for its multi-hit buff. If you want to focus on doing more damage, then you can swap the Opaline Hardtear out for the Bloodsucking Cracktear, which increases all damage you do by 20% at the cost of draining 23 health per second. I don't care for the health drain, which is why I don't use it, but the option is there for you. Make sure to cast all your buffs before fights. Drink the Physic, then cast Bestial Vitality, then cast Golden Vow, then cast Electrify Armament, and then cast Flame Grant Me Strength. Rolana's Cameo makes up a significant chunk of this build's DPS, so get used to holding the Wing Stance for 1 full second before attacking with it. Wing Stance has 2 attacks. Its light attack will quickly hit 3 times in a row, and its heavy attack will do 1 big thrusting attack. I recommend using the light attack against enemies that are easily stunned or bosses with long punish windows, so you can build up the multi-hit buff from Rotten Wing Sword Insignia and the Thorny Cracktear. Against tougher enemies, use the heavy attack to chunk their health without locking yourself into a long animation. This heavy attack also does a bunch of poise damage, and is great for getting stance breaks, after which you can switch to the Misery Cord to do big damage with the Riposte. Build number 2, the Occult Nagakiba, requested by V. Raggly 9267. Our second build for today is the Nagakiba. The viewer didn't actually specify what kind of affinity to use, but I already made a Dex Nagakiba build in a previous episode, so for this one I decided to go with an Arcane build using the Occult affinity. This is my preferred way to use the Nagakiba because its innate bleed buildup will scale with Arcane when using the Occult affinity, and since Occult only scales with one stat, it's really simple to optimize the build. For stats, we've got 60 Vigor, 13 Mind, just for convenience when casting our buffs, and 11 Endurance. Then we've got the minimum required 18 Strength for the Nagakiba, 17 Dex, boosted to the minimum required 22 by Millicent's Prosthesis, 15 Faith for some buffs, and then I put every remaining point into Arcane, which brought that up to 60. For weapons, we've got the Nagakiba with the Spinning Slash Ash of War and the Occult affinity. You can also use something like Unsheathe or any other Ash of War you like, as long as it has the Occult affinity. Then we've got a dagger using the Golden Vow Ash of War, and you can put any affinity on that because we're not going to attack with it, and the Dragon Communion Seal for casting buffs. This seal is weightless, and though I didn't include any offensive spells in this build, it'll also get the optimal incant scaling with our stats because it mainly scales with Arcane. For talismans, we've got the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, which gives a 20% damage boost when a bleed happens near you. There's also Shard of Alexander to boost our Ash of War damage by 15%, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia for its multi-hit buff, which complements Spinning Slash really well, and Millicent's Prosthesis, also for its multi-hit buff, and because it gives a +5 Dex bonus, saving us a couple points in Dex. For armor, I decided to go with the Ronin set dropped by Yura, because it goes with his sword and looks cool as hell. If you don't care about fashion and want to maximize your damage, then you can take 6 points out of Arcane and bring Endurance up to 17, and wear the White Mask with Rakshasa's armor. The White Mask gives a 10% damage boost when a bleed happens near you, similar to Lord of Blood's Exaltation, and wearing 3 pieces of Rakshasa's armor will give a 6% boost to all damage you do. I went with the Ronin armor instead, because this outfit is boring and ugly as shit, but it will give you better damage if that's what you want. For spells, we've got Bestial Vitality, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Flame Cleanse Me just because. If you want some offensive spell options, then you could also add some Dragon Communion spells to this build, such as Dragon Claw and Rotten Breath. I didn't include them because I wanted to focus on using the Nagakiba, but with our stats they'll do good damage if you decide to use them. Finally, in our Wondrous Physic, we've got the usual Opaline Hard tier and Thorny Crack tier. You can swap out the Opaline Hard tier to the Blood-Sucking tier if you want more damage, though this will come at the cost of your health draining over time. The Nagakiba's two-handed moveset is great, especially its heavy attack which does a long-range thrust. What really makes this build shine is the Spinning Slash Ash of War, which does great damage and poise damage, and hits multiple times in a row, which procs all our multi-hit buffs and sends our damage through the roof. If you also proc a bleed on an enemy and trigger the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, then you start doing insane damage with this thing. Just make sure to use your buffs before fights for this build's full power. Build number 3, Powerstance Swords of Light and Darkness, requested by Oscar Navarrete 3557. This build turned out to be a lot stronger and more fun than I expected. The Swords of Light and Darkness have the same stats and scaling, but what sets them apart is their unique skills. Light gives you a buff which boosts all holy damage you do by 20% for 60 seconds. Darkness does a bunch of holy damage and makes affected enemies take 20% more holy damage for 60 seconds, meaning you'll do a fuckload of holy damage to enemies if you use both of them. Combined with the excellent dual straight swords moveset, you can do some amazing damage with these things. For stats, we've got 60 Vigor, 19 Mind so that we have some FP to work with, and 13 Endurance. Then come the damage stats. The swords have the same requirements and scaling, and they scale with Strength and Faith. So I went with 40 Strength, 10 Dex boosted to 15 by Millicent's Prosthesis, and 40 Faith. I also included 12 Intelligence boosted to 13 by the High Priest hat to be able to cast a couple Fundamentalist incantations which require that Intelligence. Depending on your starting class, you'll end up with different stat distributions here, and so I want to note that Strength is the least important stat here. Get the other requirements first, and then put remaining points into Strength up to 40. If you end up with a bit less Strength, then that's fine, and if you end up having more points to spend, then you can leave Strength at 40 and put any extra points into Faith. For weapons, we've got the Swords of Light and Darkness. Keep in mind that you can only get one of these per playthrough, so you'll have to go into New Game Plus to get both of them. If you only have access to one, then I recommend you use the Sword of Light and get something like a broadsword with the Sacred Blade Ash of War as your second sword. We also have the Dryleaf Seal, which gets optimal incant scaling with our stats and will buff the fundamentalist incantations we'll be using. For talismans, we've got the Sacred Scorpion Charm, which buffs all holy damage you do by 12%, but increases all physical damage you take by 10%, Shard of Alexander to buff the damage on the Darkness skill, and Rotten Wing Sword Insignia plus Millicent's Prosthesis for their multi-hit buffs, which are great for dual straight swords, and the +5 dex bonus from the Prosthesis. For armor, I went with one of my personal favorite outfits, which I call my Pope armor. It uses Lita's armor and the Oathseeker Knight Gauntlets and Greaves, and then the High Priest hat for a helm. Not only do I think it looks great, I'm a Ghost fan, but the hat also provides a +1 buff to Intelligence and Arcane. We're not using Arcane in this build, but the Intelligence buff saves us a point in our stat spread. For spells, we've got a few buffs and offensive incantations this time. Our buffs are going to be Blessing of the Erdtree for big health regen over time, and Golden Vow to increase our damage by 15% and damage negation by 10% for 80 seconds. Then I included some Golden Order Fundamentalist incantations, which do holy damage and thus synergize nicely with the rest of the build. Discus of Light is a great bread and butter spell for doing FP efficient holy damage at long range, and Multi-Layered Ring of Light does a bunch of holy damage over time. Then I also included Knight's Lightning Spear, which doesn't do holy damage but is still really strong. And finally, I included the Darkness spell just for shits and giggles, because it goes with the theme of the build. It's not super useful, but if you try really hard, it can save you in a pinch, because any enemy affected by it will be blinded for a couple seconds. So you can use that to sneak up on enemies or get away from them or whatever. It's kind of a worthless spell, but it fits the theme, so why not? Finally, in our Wondrous Physic, we've got the Opaline Heart tier and the Holy Shrouding Crack tier to increase all holy damage we do by 20% for 3 minutes. You may also consider swapping the Opaline Heart tier out to the Bloodsucking tier for another 20% buff to all damage you do, but again, this will come at the cost of draining your health over time. This build has a fairly intense buff routine, but it's worth doing for the big damage. Drink your Physic, then cast Blessing of the Erdtree, then cast Golden Vow, and then use the Sword of Light to cast the Light Ash of War. Then you want to use the Sword of Darkness to hit the enemy with Darkness, the Ash of War, not the spell, and then go to town on them with dual-wielding attacks and spells. The Darkness Ash of War also does a ton of holy damage, but it takes forever to cast, so using it effectively can be tricky, but it's very much worthwhile when you do. Build number 4. A Gelmir Staff Int Faith build, requested by Augustine9191. Our final build for today is an Int Faith build using the Gelmir Glintstone Staff. The Gelmir Staff scales equally with Intelligence and Faith, making it great for hybrid builds that cast both sorceries and incantations. It also buffs lava sorceries, making it a great choice for casting spells like Magma Shot and Roiling Magma. Combine it with the Golden Order Seal, which also scales with both Int and Faith, and you've got a build which can cast all kinds of fire spells really well. For stats, we've got 55 Vigor. Normally I'd go with 60, but I wanted a couple extra points to work with for the other stats, and it's only a difference of like 96 health points, so it's not a huge deal that it's below 60. We've got 24 Mind, because this is an FP-hungry build, 16 Endurance for equip load, and then I left Strength and Dex at 10, and brought Intelligence and Faith up to 40 each. Well, I was 1 point short, and so Faith is at 39, but whatever. For weapons, we've got 2 Gelmir Glintstone Staffs. When you hold the staff and cast a lava spell, it buffs that spell's damage by 15%, and so holding 1 Gelmir Staff in each hand will provide a buff of around 32%, because the buffs are multiplicative, so they don't just add together. This means our lava spells will get some pretty good damage. I also included a hand axe with the Flaming Strike Ash of War and the Flame Art Affinity as a melee weapon because it has low stat requirements, is fairly lightweight, and still does solid damage. This build is focusing on spell damage, so the axe is mainly a backup weapon or a tool for killing trash mobs. Finally, there's also a Golden Order Seal, which can be used to cast incantations like Catch Flame and Golden Vow. Fortunately, it has the benefit of being weightless, so it works well with our limited equip load. For talismans, we've got the Fire Scorpion Charm, which boosts all fire damage we do by 12%, but also increases physical damage taken by 10%. The Graven Mask Talisman, which buffs sorceries by 8%. The Godfrey Icon, which buffs the damage of charged spells and skills by 15%. And the Talisman of the Dread from the DLC, which buffs magma spells and skills by 15%. If you don't have the DLC, then you can swap the Talisman of the Dread out for something like Dragoncrest Great Shield, Graven's School Talisman, or maybe Millicent's Prosthesis for +5 dex, so you can use a weapon like the Magma Blade instead of the Hand Axe. For armor, I decided to go with the Gelmir Knight set, which provides solid protection and 51 poise at a relatively low weight, and matches the theme of the build. We've got a bunch of spells to work with in this build. Our buffs are going to be Blessing of the Erdtree for health regen over time, Golden Vow for more damage and negation, and Flame Grant Me Strength to boost physical and fire damage. Then I went with a mix of sorceries and incantations for offensive spells. Magma Shot and Catch Flame are our bread and butter spells, doing good damage with solid FP efficiency. Then there's Gelmir's Fury and Burn O Flame for AoE damage, in case you've got enemies around you and need a "fuck you, get away from me" button. There's Roiling Magma for either huge single target damage or AoE damage at a distance, and I also included Rykard's Rancor because it fits the build, but it also really sucks, and so I wouldn't recommend actually trying to use it. Keep in mind that the buffs, as well as Catch Flame and Burn O Flame, are incantations, and so are cast with the Golden Order seal, not the Gelmir Staff. You may want to simplify the build and remove Catch Flame and Burn O Flame, but definitely keep the 3 buff spells because they're very important for your damage and survival. Finally, in the Wondrous Physic, we've got the Opaline Heart tier for damage negation, and the Flame Shrouding Crack tier to boost all our fire damage by 20% for 3 minutes. And once again, you can swap the Opaline Heart tier out to the Bloodsucking tier if you want an extra 20% damage at the cost of draining your health over time. The lava spells in this build are really fun to use, and they can do some pretty damn good damage if you use your buffs and charge them. Drink your Physic, then cast Blessing of the Erdtree, then cast Golden Vow, and then cast Flame Grant Me Strength. Make sure you've got a Gelmir Staff in each hand, and go to town with the lava sorceries. You do also have the Axe, and despite the build not being centered around it, it still does pretty good damage too. Just make sure you use Flaming Strike on it, and then do the follow-up heavy attack for Flaming Strike to buff it with additional fire damage to maximize your damage output. That's it for today's builds. I'm sorry they took so long to make, but hopefully there's been less time between these requests and this video than there were for the last one. I've been busy, and editing is a lot of work, so it takes me some time to get to them. With that said, if you want Elden Ring builds, and you want them now, then consider joining my channel as a member. Type 2 diabetians get access to my priority build requests form, where you can submit requests for Elden Ring builds, and I'll make them within 24 hours. I'll send you the build planner link. There won't be a video, it'll just be a build planner link. I may make a video using that build within a couple days afterwards, but you will get the build planner link so you can see the build and use it immediately. And I'll give you tips and answer any questions you have about the build and help you tweak it to make it work for you. As always, thanks for watching. My name is Diabedor, and I will catch you later.